The year is 1732. For nearly 3 decades, the British have been growing their empire in North America, establishing colonies up and down the Atlantic coast. But where are they going to put their next one? How about a place where England has almost no chance of actually defending or supplying the colony, deep in the heart of what is today the southeastern United States? Oh, and it's gonna be run by an unlikely group of folks, too. You know, the guys who would probably be locked up in debtors' prison back home. This is the story of Georgia, the last and perhaps strangest of the original 13 colonies. Welcome to my channel. England first chartered the province of Georgia in 1732. It was the last of the original 13 colonies to be founded, and was named in honor of King George II. But really, the story of Georgia starts with James Oglethorpe, a British army officer who served in the war with Spain in the 1700s. In that conflict, he was appalled by the miserable conditions in which captured Spanish soldiers were held, and upon returning to England, he became a vocal advocate of prison reform. In 1717, Oglethorpe was elected to Parliament, where he continued his advocacy for prisoners, especially those locked up for debt. They would become some of the earliest settlers of the new colony, but more on them soon. While there, he became friends with Robert Castell, another member of Parliament who was himself imprisoned for debt. Unfortunately, Castell died of smallpox while in Fleet Prison, a notorious debtors' jail in London, and Oglethorpe became determined to find a solution to the problem of poverty and debt in England. His idea was to establish a new colony in North America where these individuals could start over, free from the crushing weight of their debt and the unwinnable game of poverty in 18th century England. At the same time, Oglethorpe wanted to help block the spread of French and Spanish influence in the interior of North America, so he proposed a new southern colony to serve as a buffer between the established British colonies of South Carolina and Florida, which was then ruled by Spain. Oglethorpe's proposal was approved by King George II in 1732, and the king granted him a royal charter to establish the province of Georgia. Though England gave Oglethorpe permission to establish this new colony, they also strongly suggested that he make sure the colony was properly defended. See, the area that Georgia would occupy was still claimed by Spain, and the indigenous populations of the region were often allied with them. Plus, the French were spreading westward across the Mississippi Valley, and English leaders worried they might even try to claim the territory. And so Oglethorpe had to strike a delicate balance between trying to make a colony that would succeed despite the odds, while also ensuring that it could defend itself against outside powers. Oglethorpe was given the title of sole and absolute proprietor of the colony, meaning that he had the right to govern it and receive income from it. But he wasn't entirely alone in this venture. He formed a group of 21 trustees, or proprietors, to help him oversee the colony. And so the colony of Georgia got off to a shaky start. When the Board of Trustees met for the first time in 1733 to organize the colony, there was tension right away. Oglethorpe and others who had come up with the idea for the colony saw it as a humanitarian experiment, a chance to help people escape the crushing poverty and rigid class system of 18th century England. Other members of the board, however, saw the colony as an economic opportunity and pushed to allow slavery and the importation of manufactured goods from England. Tensions like this would continue throughout the colony's early history. But before any of that, there was the small matter of actually founding the colony. Oglethorpe set out for Georgia in 1735 with about 65 settlers, mostly young men. Upon arrival, they explored the coast and settled on the site of present-day Savannah. By 1736, Fort James Oglethorpe was built, and the first civilian settlers began to arrive. It was clear that the colony was going to struggle, though the area they had settled on was unhealthy and there was little success in growing crops due to bad soil quality. The first winter was hard, and of the 65 original settlers, only 13 were still alive by the following spring. Of the new arrivals, half died of malaria and typhoid fever. Even Oglethorpe himself nearly died of disease, but recovered and went on to help found the town of Charleston. It's here that we need to talk about the indigenous peoples who had lived in the area for centuries. Before Europeans arrived, several thousand Native Americans lived in present-day Georgia. The main ones that Oglethorpe and his crew encountered were the Gwali and the Yamacraw, but Oglethorpe wanted to avoid conflict with them, seeing them as potential allies in the ongoing struggle against the Spanish. Oglethorpe visited the Yamacraw chief Tomochichi in 1733, presenting him with gifts and outlining his plans for the colony. To his credit, Oglethorpe learned some of the Yamacraw language and treated the natives with respect, something that was rare for the time period, and so a treaty was made. The English would settle on the coast and inland. The Yomacraw would retain use of the land. However, the following year, when Oglethorpe returned to found the settlement of Savannah, he did not inform Tomochichi, nor did he tell him that the trustees had revoked the agreement to keep the natives in the interior. Despite this setback, Oglethorpe continued to cultivate good relations with the natives, and he sought to expand trade with them, viewing them as crucial allies against the Spanish. While relations with the indigenous people were generally good during Oglethorpe's tenure, this wouldn't continue. As the colony grew, white settlers began pushing into Native American lands, and by the late 1740s, relations had deteriorated. By 1737, the colony was growing, but slowly. To attract more settlers, the Board of Trustees offered generous land grants to encourage people to move there. They also allowed the importation of African slaves into the colony, which caused tension with Oglethorpe, who believed the colony should be worked by its inhabitants. Still, slavery was a necessity for the colony, if it was going to grow economically, and so it was allowed to continue. The trustees also realized that defending the colony would be costly, and most of the trustees refused to pay the taxes Oglethorpe wanted to levy on settlers to support the military. Instead, they decided to turn the colony over to royal rule in 1752, and Oglethorpe stepped down as governor. Under royal rule, Georgia prospered, becoming a major producer of rice and indigo, and attracting more settlers than ever. It became the buffer colony against the Spanish that the English had hoped for, and the fur trading posts that Oglethorpe had set up in the interior turned into the Georgia towns of Augusta and Charleston. So what was life like in Georgia during the time of its founding? Well, as mentioned before, conditions were tough. The area where Savannah was built was prone to flooding, and the climate was hot and humid. Smallpox and malaria were common, and food was scarce in the early days. Most settlers were farmers, and they struggled to grow crops in the unfamiliar environment. To make matters worse, attacks from Spanish forces and Native Americans were frequent, and so life in early Georgia was characterized by hardship and uncertainty. Yet, despite the difficulties, the colony persevered. The settlers were determined to make a new life for themselves in the New World, and so they worked hard to build homes, farms, and a new community. And despite the struggles, there were also moments of hope and triumph. The colony's first representative assembly met in 1743, and the first church was built in 1744. The Battle of Bloody Marsh in 1742 was a decisive victory for the colony and proved that Georgia could defend itself against outside threats. As for the debtors who Oglethorpe had envisioned founding the colony, they never came. The Board of Trade vetoed the plan to bring them over, believing that the cost of transporting them would be too great. Instead, the early settlers were a mix of artisans, farmers, persecuted Protestants, and those seeking opportunity. The colony evolved into a typical southern colony with plantations and a focus on agriculture, and the ideals of its founding were gradually forgotten. Georgia is a fascinating and important part of American history. Its unique founding as a colony with lofty ideals of social reform, and its role as a critical buffer between the British colonies and their rivals, make it a must-study topic for anyone looking to understand the roots of the United States. The colony's struggles to survive in a hostile environment and its evolution into a typical southern colony are also valuable lessons in the challenges of early colonial life. Georgia played a vital role in the American Revolution and later as a state in the early Republic, but its origins as a colony founded on the principles of charity, justice, and defense are just as important to its history as any other aspect. I hope you enjoyed learning more about the founding of Georgia. Let me know in the comments below what aspects of the story surprised you the most. Was it the fact that slavery was temporarily outlawed, Oglethorpe's near death from disease, or the colony's humble beginnings? Also let me know if there are any other early colonies you would like to see covered in this series. Thanks so much for watching. Subscribe for more information on early America.